Hey guys, it's breakfast in the 1800s, and your options are simple, dry toast, disappointment, or the tonic that makes the wallpaper flirt with you. The doctor says it's for your nerves, your husband says it's for your silence, and you say it's delicious. By noon, the furniture's whispering encouragement, the ferns have opinions, and you're fairly sure the piano's been judging your posture since last Thursday. But before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. And drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You wake up in a room that smells like lavender, ghost opinions, and repressed emotions. The kind of room where doilies multiply when you're not looking, and portraits of unsmiling ancestors watch you breathe like it's a personal offense. The wallpaper is floral, aggressively so, and the bed frame squeaks in a tone that could only be described as judgmental. Your corset is already on, which is alarming, as you don't remember putting it there. It pinches your ribs with the kind of affection a snake might feel toward its lunch. A maid named Alice is dusting the top of a doorframe no one has ever looked at and likely never will. She does this every morning. You suspect she's punishing the wood for existing. She greets you with the resigned cheer of a woman who's already seen too much. You respond by glaring at a vase until it looks self-conscious. Somewhere downstairs, a grandfather clock lets out a single bong, as if clearing its throat before another day of nonsense. The doctor arrives promptly, by which you mean he barges into your boudoir like time is a suggestion and boundaries are for peasants. His name is Dr. Thistlewick, and he carries a little black bag full of tinctures, tonics, and quiet dread. He wears pince-nez glasses, a mustache like a dried caterpillar, and the unmistakable air of a man who once fainted during a bloodletting, but still considers himself God's gift to wombs. Without looking at you directly, he declares that your humors are imbalanced, your energy's too vigorous, and your spleen probably has opinions. You ask what's wrong with you. He smiles, the way someone might smile at a particularly confusing vegetable. Hysteria, he says, gently as if it's a compliment. A common affliction of the female constitution, overactivity of the womb, sometimes brought on by novels or too much thinking. You stare at him like you're deciding between throwing your hairbrush or the porcelain cat. Instead, you choose silence, which disappoints him. He was hoping for weeping, or at least a dramatic collapse onto the chaise. He prescribes something called Mrs. Weatherby's Calming Elixir for Lady Nerves, which, upon closer inspection, is 80% alcohol and 20% opium, with a hint of rose water to maintain decency. You take the bottle because it's either that or bite him. Breakfast is dry toast and disappointment. The cook has once again overboiled the eggs into small rubber suggestions of food. You stare at the jam like it might unlock your higher self. The morning paper says the Queen is doing fine, and women are still not allowed to own anything interesting. You take a sip of your elixir and blink twice. The fireplace looks more confident than usual. Your husband is somewhere else, as always, possibly hunting, possibly attending a lecture on aggressive wallpaper, possibly hiding from the tone of your voice last Tuesday. You are not concerned. He will return when the tea runs out or he remembers he owns a wife. Until then, you are left with your corset, your tonic, and the slow-growing suspicion that your brain might be trying to escape out your ears. Outside, the garden hums with bees and rigid propriety. A young cousin, whose name you never bother to remember, is practicing embroidery on the lawn. She is making a pillow that says, "Grace is silent," which makes you want to scream into a scone. Instead, you take another sip. The bees begin to harmonize. Mid-morning arrives with a fog of ennui, and too many letters from people you never liked. One is from your aunt, who writes in endless loops about how she once cured her sadness with lavender soap and 7 minutes of prayer. Another is from the Ladies' Reading Society, inviting you to attend a lecture entitled Proper Posture and the Dangers of Emotion. You decline internally and light the invitation on fire externally. Alice re-enters with fresh linens and a face that says she's considered moving to the colonies just to avoid your mood swings. She offers to draw you a bath. You accept, not because you want one, but because it gives you an excuse to throw something into hot water. While she prepares the tub, you sit in front of the mirror and attempt to pin your hair like a woman who hasn't contemplated setting fire to the drapes. The pins rebel. Your hair forms its own opinions and refuses to be subdued. You briefly consider cutting it all off, then remember what happened to Cousin Imogen. The family still hasn't recovered. The bath is hot and smells faintly of lilac and surrender. You sink into it like a poem written by someone too exhausted to rhyme. The tonic buzzes in your veins. Your thoughts wander. You imagine running away to France, to Scotland, to the moon. You imagine smashing a violin just because no one expects it. You imagine laughter your own, uncontained, and it scares you more than it should. You emerge wrinkled, flushed, and still angry. But now it's a more elegant sort of fury, the kind that writes letters with excessive underlining and speaks in clipped syllables at dinner. You put on your afternoon corset, which is somehow tighter than the morning one, and prepare to descend the stairs like a woman who hasn't just declared emotional war on her furniture. The hallway smells like beeswax and judgment. The portraits frown. The floorboards creak ominously. You smile. Let them. Breakfast is toast, tea, and a teaspoon of Victorian heroin. The toast is burned on one side and undercooked on the other, which the cook insists is a balance of texture. The tea is lukewarm, served in a cup with a hairline crack that seems to grow every time you sigh near it. And the laudanum, shimmering in its amber bottle like bottled secrets, is placed on a silver spoon with the same ceremony one might reserve for an heirloom or a curse. You swirl it delicately, like this is an afternoon salon and not a scheduled unraveling of your mental clarity. The first sip is sharp, syrupy, and clings to the roof of your mouth like an apology that never quite lands. You chase it with a bite of dry toast and pretend the crumbling isn't metaphorical. The room starts to hum, gently at first, like a polite string quartet tuning up inside your skull. By the second sip, the hum has turned into something symphonic, and you begin to feel the edges of your body blur slightly, as though your limbs have become suggestions rather than rules. Outside the window, the garden sways with a grace it absolutely didn't have yesterday. The hedge maze appears to bow. The roses lean conspiratorially toward one another, whispering in floral. You're fairly certain one of them just winked. You blink back. It's unclear who started it. You stand, or at least attempt to, and find that your spine has temporarily adopted the posture of a question mark. The room tilts, like it's considering a nap. You steady yourself with a hand on the table, which feels stickier than it should, possibly because someone spilled jam, or because time has lost interest in behaving. You drift toward the parlor with the intent of reading, or existing, or quietly being horizontal until someone tells you to stop. The drapes, once innocent, have transformed into dragons, not metaphorical ones. Actual stitched monstrosities with velvet snouts and fringed teeth. They watch you with interest. You watch them back. One of them breathes. You nod solemnly. Mutual respect is established. The piano in the corner plays a single note by itself. You decide not to question it. Your husband enters the room at some point, though whether it's before or after you begin speaking to the clock is debatable. He says something about guests, or accounting, or the weather. It's hard to tell, because his words arrive wrapped in cotton. His mustache appears longer today, possibly due to perspective, possibly ambition. You tilt your head. He's speaking clearly now. He says, "I've been thinking about how you're feeling," and you nearly drop the teacup. Not because of the statement, but because the teacup just asked if you wanted more sugar. You nod at both of them. Your husband continues, his eyes softer, more curious. He asks how he can help. You begin to suspect something is amiss. He listens, actually listens, his face open and kind and not remotely condescending. You're halfway through telling him your theory about the vicar and the missing cake knives when you realize he's not blinking, or breathing, or real. He's made of fog and wishful thinking, and when you reach out, your hand passes through air and echoes. The real version is likely in his study arguing with a ledger or polishing his indifference. You lie back on the settee and stare at the ceiling, which now has constellations. You count 12 stars and name them after your repressed emotions. One of them blinks. You blink back. It's become a theme. Alice appears with a damp cloth and the air of a woman who's given up asking questions. She tucks a blanket around you, mutters something about keeping the window closed this time, and exits before the bookshelf starts reciting poetry again. You try to sit up, but your knees are full of clouds, and your elbows have joined a protest against gravity. It seems unfair, but not surprising. The clock strikes something, not a number, a mood. Time slows to a syrup. Your thoughts meander like ducks on a foggy pond. You consider standing, then consider the meaning of standing, then consider lying down again, but in a more meaningful way. By the time lunch arrives, you've declared truce with the drapes, composed a love letter to a doily, and forgotten how verbs work. The sandwich tastes like fog and memories. The air hums. The spoon in your hand has a face. You don't question it. It's laudanum o'clock, again, and everything is just beginning to make sense. The conservatory is supposed to be a place of peace. It has glass walls and potted intentions, sunlight filtered through grime and polite delusion. The air smells like overwatered orchids and Victorian ambition. You step in, not to enjoy it, but to scream behind a ficus. The ficus has been there longer than most servants and judges know one. You appreciate that. You crouch beside it, clutching your skirts like a war widow, and let out a sound that might qualify as either grief or an overture. The scream does not help. Somewhere near the east window, someone has left the harp unattended. It stands there smugly, all gold and strings and condescension. You eye it with suspicion. It eyes you back, though possibly just because the laudanum hasn't worn off yet. You approach it slowly, like one would a noble enemy or a priest who asks too many questions. It gleams in the sun like it knows how expensive it is. You pluck one string. It produces a note that offends your ancestors. Another string, lower this time, buzzes like a mosquito with a title. You narrow your eyes. The harp is mocking you. You slap it gently. It twangs in protest. You slap it harder. A pot falls off the shelf behind you. The fern doesn't flinch. You take that as encouragement. You wrestle the harp for a good 3 minutes before you remember you were supposed to be conserving something. Your dignity, perhaps, or your energy. But both have left the room, along with your sense of proportion, and whatever social instinct once prevented you from threatening musical instruments. Then you hear it. The sound that will haunt your waking hours and possibly your afterlife. A low, wet honk from across the room, like a goose attempting jazz. You turn slowly. There, on a chair clearly unfit for its girth, sits a tuba. It doesn't move. It doesn't need to. You feel something primal stir inside you, a loathing so pure it feels ancestral. You don't know who brought it into the conservatory or why, but you suspect dark intentions. Perhaps someone played it once during a family dinner. Perhaps it witnessed a scandal. Perhaps it simply exists too loudly. You march over and poke it. It emits a hollow sound, smug and wheezy. You recoil. It's mocking you again. The ficus watches silently. The fern sways slightly in shared disapproval. You pick up a watering can and threaten the tuba with it. It dares you. You do not follow through, but the tension is palpable. Instead, you collapse into the chaise, out of breath and dangerously close to weeping over brass. You begin petting the nearest fern. It's soft and understanding. You name it, Harold. You tell it your secrets, all of them, especially the ones about the governess and the stolen marmalade. The fern absorbs this information with grace. Alice walks in just as you begin speaking, fluent goose. Not speaking to a goose, speaking like a goose. Your tongue forgets English and adopts a series of honks and clicks, punctuated by flaps of your hands and a noble head tilt. Alice pauses, blinks, and nods once, as if this explains everything. She sets down a tray of scones and backs out slowly. You continue your conversation with Harold. He agrees the tuba must die. Outside, the sun continues to shine on people who still believe in normal mornings. Inside, you sit among leaves and brass, barefoot now, because the shoes were too judgmental. The harp leans slightly to the left, injured in pride but unbroken. The tuba remains silent, possibly stunned, possibly planning. You sip more laudanum from a teacup shaped like an apology. The ficus whispers something unrepeatable. The conservatory breathes with you. You are one with the madness. You are the wind through the orchids. You are the distant cousin no one talks about, and the fern thinks you're doing splendidly. The fainting couch has become more than furniture. It is your altar, your weapon, your personal stage for emotional collapse. Upholstered in something that once resembled burgundy and now resembles dried blood and sighs, it waits by the window like a velvet accomplice. You approach it like a soldier returns to war, not because you want to, but because there are battles to be lost while reclining. You throw yourself onto it with the elegance of a woman who has been insulted by a cucumber sandwich and hasn't emotionally recovered. One arm flops dramatically over the edge. The other clutches at your forehead like it's housing every secret disappointment you've ever endured. A maid pauses in the hallway. She watches, unimpressed, then resumes dusting a banister that never did anything wrong. A letter from your aunt lies unopened on the tea table. You already know what it says. Something about digestion and prayer. Maybe a stern recommendation to stop reading French things. Last time, it was a moral warning against rhubarb. You stare at it until it curls slightly at the corner, as if wilting under the weight of your judgment. You decide, this is a small victory. Laudanum percolates in your bloodstream, singing a slow lullaby composed by someone with too many teeth and no moral compass. It tells you things, not in words, exactly more in urges. Climb that curtain, throw that porcelain dog. Ask the vicar why his eyebrows are shaped like accusations. The whispers are persuasive. You don't always obey, but you never really say no. The butler announces your husband like he's a monarch and not a man who can't butter toast without supervision. He strides into the room with all the confidence of someone who has never fainted for dramatic effect. He says your name like it's a problem he means to solve. He begins a sentence with, "Now listen here," which is brave and stupid in equal measure. You exhale sharply and swoon. It's an elegant, practiced maneuver. You slide into unconsciousness like a letter slipping beneath a door. You hear the faint rustle of his frustration as your arm drapes theatrically over the edge of the couch. He clears his throat. You do not move. He sighs. You sigh louder. The room swells with performance. When you revive, it's unclear how long it's been. Time in this house moves like molasses under moral scrutiny. He is gone, and the fainting couch holds you like a conspirator. You sit up slowly, like a ghost rehearsing her return. Outside, a bird chirps in a tone you find deeply sarcastic. You glare at it through the window until it leaves. The parlor smells like potpourri and mild disappointment. Someone has left you a small tray of biscuits and a note that says, "For strength." The biscuits are shaped like flowers and taste like the concept of beige. You eat 3 and feel nothing. You consider lying down again, just to be sure. A guest arrives. It's Mr. Thistlewick, your neighbor and known conversational hazard. He smiles with the teeth of a man who believes women love to be corrected. He comments on the weather. You collapse before he finishes the sentence. This time you hit the armrest slightly, too hard, and see actual stars. Worth it. Later, Alice finds you still reclined, eyes half closed, one leg dangling elegantly like a punctuation mark. She replaces your cold tea with slightly warmer tea and offers you a look that sits somewhere between loyalty and exhausted despair. You tell her you're conserving energy for the evening's dinner, which you intend to attend wearing pearls and a pointed sense of grievance. You lie back again, the ceiling swirling gently. The plaster patterns begin to resemble historical betrayal. You imagine your name carved into a history book beneath the words, "She tried." Your corset tightens as if offended by your ambition. You take a shallow breath and clutch your wrist as though it's delivering bad news. The fainting couch doesn't judge you. It understands. Every tufted button holds a secret. Every cushion has absorbed the sighs of women who've survived worse with less. You rest your head against it and close your eyes. Laudanum whispers, "Let's cause problems on purpose." You smile. You already are. Percival, a creature composed entirely of fur, disdain, and the ancient knowledge of things better left unspoken, sits on the windowsill like a judgmental deity. He blinks slowly, calculating the precise moment to leap off and ruin something delicate. You are on the floor, cross-legged, surrounded by crumpled paper and the lingering scent of despair mixed with marmalade. He watches, twitching his tail like he's heard better ideas from soup. You've been writing for hours, or minutes. Time doesn't work properly when your pulse is made of laudanum and misplaced vengeance. The manifesto began innocently enough, a letter of concern, perhaps a suggestion to Her Majesty that the Empire reconsider corsets or at least permit women to speak without the threat of fainting. But somewhere between page 5 and the marmalade smear that was meant to symbolize the struggle of the feminine soul, things took a turn. Now you're holding a quill like it's a dagger and shouting, "Depose the patriarchy" at a jar of preserves. The manifesto, despite its lack of vowels and overwhelming stickiness, feels important, urgent, even a cry for liberation, or, at the very least, a firm request for less tool. You look up, eyes wild, and declare to the room, "The monarchy must know." Percival blinks. You take that as encouragement. You dip your quill again, this time into raspberry. A bold choice, revolutionary. You scratch out something that could be a battle cry, or possibly a dessert recipe depending on the angle. The ink blot resembles a horse on fire. You nod solemnly. Yes, that feels correct. Your aunt appears in the doorway like a Victorian specter summoned by nonsense. She's holding an embroidery hoop and a look of tightly stitched concern. You are not her favorite niece. She reminds you of this by merely existing. Her voice is clipped, vowels trimmed like hedges. Perhaps, darling, you would benefit from a quieter hobby. Needlework? Scripture copywork? Less marmalade? You stand, dramatically, as if powered by your own indignation. The paper flutters around you like revolutionary snow. You announce that you require a sword, not a metaphorical one, a real, cold, slightly rusty blade that's seen things and maybe whispered in Latin. You need it for reasons, political ones, or emotional. Possibly to cut your corset, possibly to duel the wallpaper. Your aunt does not flinch. She has raised 8 children and buried 3 husbands, all of whom were allergic to confrontation. She crosses to the tea tray and pours herself a cup without breaking eye contact. Embroidery, she repeats, teaches patience and control. You are unconvinced. The world is on fire, the patriarchy thrives, and your cat is now licking his paw like he's auditioning for a better family. You stomp one foot, not hard, but symbolically. Your aunt leaves you to your mess, she mutters. Something about girls who read too much and doors that should remain locked. You collapse onto the chaise like a misunderstood opera heroine. Percival hops down and lands on your manifesto. He stretches across it pointedly. You sigh. He is both betrayer and editor. He yawns in your face, revealing the sharp little weapons he uses to destroy lace curtains and hope. You try to retrieve the document. He bites you gently on the wrist, which in cat language means, "No one needs to see this, darling." You consider fighting him. You also consider crying again. You do both, in quick succession, then blow your nose into a monogrammed handkerchief that once belonged to your great-grandmother and now belongs to feminine despair. The sword is not forthcoming. The queen has not replied. The marmalade is congealing into something biblical. You lie back, eyes on the ceiling, whispering revolution between sips of tepid tea. The drapes flutter, possibly in agreement. Percival watches from the edge of the couch now, expression unreadable. He knows things. About you. About the monarchy. About the time you tried to dye your stockings with beet juice and ended up staining the bishop. You meet his gaze and nod once. He does not return the gesture. You have never been lonelier or stickier, but your manifesto glistens in the afternoon light, and that's something, probably. The apothecary is located between a butcher and a woman who sells cursed bonnets. You know they're cursed because one made you cry for 6 hours and develop a strong opinion about chimney sweeps. The shop's sign swings unevenly, etched in a font that screams witch trial, and the bell above the door rings with the tone of a man who's just dropped his sandwich into a puddle. You step inside anyway, because you are brave and mildly unhinged and out of laudanum. Inside, it smells like lavender, mildew, and secrets never meant to be shared. The lighting is suspiciously dim. The jars on the walls are labeled in Latin, or possibly curses, and several of them appear to be filled with either dried herbs or tiny bones. A cat blinks at you from atop a barrel labeled elixirs, and you feel judged, again, which has become the theme of your week. The apothecary appears from behind a curtain that might once have been a tablecloth but is now haunted. He is wearing no fewer than 12 scarves, none of which match, and all of which smell faintly like betrayal. His beard is long and filled with either crumbs or intentions. He greets you with a nod that implies he already knows too much about you, including your birth hour and emotional weaknesses. You nod back, because that's how power struggles work. "I need something for the nerves," you say, as if nerves are your only problem. He doesn't ask for details. He simply reaches beneath the counter and pulls out a vial the color of bruised peaches. The label reads, "For nervous agitations and unladylike thoughts." The handwriting slants dangerously to the left. You ask what's in it. He smiles with all his teeth, which feel uncomfortably numerous, and says, "It's better if you don't know." You don't argue. You've learned that arguing with men in scarves rarely ends well. You hand him 2 shillings and a button from your coat. He accepts both. The vial is warm in your hand, like it's been thinking about you. You leave quickly, before he tries to read your aura or recommend a marriage. Back home, the piano waits. It's been smug all morning. One of its keys sticks, and not by accident. You're certain it's sending messages, possibly to the clergy. You pour 2 drops of the elixir onto your tongue. It tastes like licorice and revenge. The floor tilts slightly. The chandelier shivers. You blink once, and the piano is breathing. You approach it with the careful deliberation of a woman about to change the trajectory of her legacy. You place one hand on the top, gently, as if to soothe it. You whisper, "We could have had peace." Then you slam your other hand onto the keyboard with all the fury of a woman who's had enough. It screams in C minor. You scream back. By the time the maid walks in, you've declared formal war on the piano, drafted a treaty, and broken 3 spoons trying to conduct a symphony of one. Your hair has escaped its pins. Your dress is off one shoulder like you've just come from a duel or a deeply emotional waltz. The maid says nothing. She closes the door quietly. You respect that. Percival peers at you from the bookshelf. He's seen worse. He licks his paw and pointedly turns his back. You don't blame him. You sit down, breathless, victorious, slightly vibrating. The elixir hums through your veins like scandal. You are powerful. You are luminous. You are mildly foaming at the mouth. The piano sulks. You hum a lullaby that doesn't exist yet. The curtains sway like they're clapping. Somewhere in the distance, a bird caws in Morse code. You are almost certain it says, "She's lost it." You are also certain you never had it to begin with. You take one more drop, just to be sure. It starts innocently, which is how all dangerous things begin. You're sitting in the parlor, pretending to embroider, while actually stitching angry thoughts into a doily. Outside, the rain is falling like it's auditioning for a gothic novel, and inside, Edith is sipping her tea with the quiet menace of a woman who's watched 4 men fall down the stairs and only intervened once. You're not sure how she got invited. No one ever remembers inviting Edith. She simply arrives. She blinks at you, twice, slowly, like a cat or a curse. You blink back, just to see what happens. She leans forward with the grace of a woman who's hiding something excellent in her corset and slides a card across the table. It's small, cream-colored, and embossed with the image of a fox mid-smirk. The card smells faintly of ink, oranges, and trouble. You pick, bed it up, and feel a shift in the universe. The lace on your gloves wilts. Somewhere in the house, a clock stops ticking. The parlor rug grows suspiciously warmer beneath your feet. You look at Edith. She nods once and says only, "Tuesday, wear boots." Then she resumes her tea, like nothing life-altering just occurred. Tuesday arrives, wrapped in fog and possible betrayal. You fake a headache, which is easy, because you've had one since 1863. Your husband mutters something about weak constitutions and the devil's influence as you slip out the door with a satchel full of peppermint lozenges, a lace kerchief, and a blunt letter opener you've named Florence. You walk 3 blocks past the apothecary, where 12 scarves nod sagely from behind a jar of unidentifiable teeth, then turn into an alley that smells like secrets and questionable jam. At the end of it, there's a door painted black, slightly ajar, as if expecting you. Inside, the room is filled with women. Some wear mourning veils, some wear opera gloves with intent, and one woman, possibly named Mabel, has fashioned a fascinator out of her husband's pocket watch and a dead bird. They turn toward you in unison, like flowers sensing scandal. Edith appears beside you with no explanation and offers you a biscuit. You take it, you eat it. It tastes like freedom and cardamom. Someone rings a bell made from the melted remnants of a governess's chastity pendant, and the meeting begins. There is no roll call. There is only a soft, collective exhale, as if every woman has been holding her breath for the last decade and can finally let it go without being accused of unseemliness. Edith stands. Her voice is velvet-wrapped steel. "Welcome, sister. You have been observed and deemed sufficiently unraveled." They applaud politely. No one cries, except for a woman in the corner who's embroidering swear words into a baby bonnet. The rules are simple. Bring your own biscuits. No discussing husbands, unless it's hilarious. If someone brings up embroidery as a solution to emotional unrest, they will be escorted to the knitting pit. There is no knitting pit, but everyone pretends there is. You're assigned a code name, Vixen 2. You don't ask who Vixen 1 was. Her name is never spoken, only toasted to, with sherry and a thin smile. Activities include letter burning, passive-aggressive poetry, and screaming into jars. Someone presents a pamphlet titled 10 Ways to Curse a Sofa Without Getting Caught. Another woman, Agnes maybe, or God recites a dramatic monologue about lace and vengeance that ends in thunder and applause. You feel seen. You feel heard. You feel like setting something mildly important on fire. At the end of the meeting, they teach you the secret handshake. It involves a flick of the wrist, a raised eyebrow, and the quiet hum of a waltz that no one ever dances to anymore. You perform it passively. Edith nods. You've passed. Back home, the piano trembles when you walk by. You write Hysteria Club on a slip of paper and hide it beneath the loose floorboard where you keep your rage and your better ideas. You sip laudanum like it's holy water and stare out the window. The revolution smells like rosewater and treason. And maybe, just maybe, you're finally ready for it. You are not looking for the demon. You're just trying to relax. Your doctor has suggested less agitation and more quiet contemplation, which sounds suspiciously like code for sit still and stop alarming the staff. So you sit in the drawing room, sipping tepid tea and staring at the floral wallpaper, which you've always hated. It's a dizzying explosion of vines and pansies, like a fever dream had a baby with a funeral arrangement. It climbs the walls with smug, leafy confidence. You want to slap it. At first, it's just shapes. The curve of a petal that looks a little like a shoulder, a vine that might be a leg if you squint hard enough and ignore your better judgment. Then she moves. Not dramatically, not like a stage play or a seance gone wrong, just a flicker, a hand, the flutter of fingers brushing aside a hydrangea like it's been in her way for centuries. You blink. She blinks back. She's in the wallpaper, yes, crawling, slowly, methodically, like she has nowhere better to be and all the time in the world to get there. Her hair is long and tangled, her dress outdated and damp with something that does not look like tea. Her eyes are the color of a bad omen. She does not look surprised to see you. She looks bored, as if you're the late one. You do not scream. You've already used up your allotted weekly outburst, and besides, no one listened last time. You simply lift your teacup toward her in an unspoken gesture of hospitality and mild defiance. She nods once and continues her climb along the molding, one hand anchored in a tulip, the other reaching toward what might be the past or the ceiling, depending on perspective. You lean in slightly. Do you want some tea? You ask, not sure if it will echo inside the wallpaper or if your husband will overhear and send for the vicar again. She pauses, tilts her head. You swear she raises one eyebrow. You pour a second cup and place it neatly on the end table. She seems pleased, or possibly hungry. Her name is never given, but you both understand that introductions are unnecessary. She is not a ghost. Ghosts have manners and tragic backstories. This one has no patience, no shoes, and a plan. You ask her, quietly, if she knows how to collapse a marriage using only household items and carefully timed silences. She smirks. You take that as a yes. The two of you strategize in the pauses between chimes of the grandfather clock. She taps her finger against the wall when she disagrees. You scratch notes into your embroidery pattern, replacing roses with daggers. She suggests something involving arsenic and a monologue. You offer her jam. She refuses. She says, it makes her sleepy. The maid enters at one point, sees you talking to the wall, and quickly exits. You do not blame her. You would leave too, if you had the good sense and anywhere to go. Later, the doctor arrives. He smells like dust and misplaced confidence. He peers at you over his spectacles and asks how you've been feeling. You tell him the truth. The wallpaper has a woman in it, you say calmly, as if discussing weather or treason. We're sharing resources and grievances. He nods, scribbles something that definitely isn't helpful into his notebook, and murmurs, perfectly normal for your temperament. You want to ask what temperament that is exactly, but the wallpaper woman presses her hand against the wall and you remember you are not alone. When he leaves, you lean closer and whisper, he thinks I'm imagining you. She grins, sharp and slow, and mouths, good. You drink the rest of your tea and begin planning where to hang the ladder. Your husband sits at the breakfast table like a monument to obliviousness, paper held high, scone in hand, breathing your oxygen. His cravat is crooked. You could fix it. You could also tighten it slowly until his vision blurs and he wonders aloud whether the wallpaper has always breathed like that. Instead, you sip your tea and pretend not to be planning his gentle demise with a sugar spoon and righteous fury. He doesn't notice that you've replaced his shaving cream with lemon curd. You watched him use it this morning, blinking at the strange consistency like a cow contemplating algebra. Then he shrugged, muttered something about new formulas, and carried on. Now he smells like citrus and colonialism. Across the table, he asks if you're feeling delicate. The words hang in the air like a wet sock. You place your cup down with just enough force to remind the porcelain who's in charge. Delicate, you repeat, smiling the way a shark might if it had something very sharp hidden in its corset. He nods, pleased to have named your experience for you. You've been emotional. You wonder how many crimes you could commit before lunch if you pace yourself. The butter knife is right there. So is the fire poker. And technically, setting the chaise lounge ablaze wouldn't be a crime if you declared it art. He turns the page of his newspaper, still unaware that he's sharing a table with a woman who hosted a séance in the linen closet and joined a secret society with blood oaths and biscuit quotas. He comments on the economy. You consider throwing a candlestick at his ear. He picks up a second scone, oblivious, and smears it with jam while humming something tuneless and smug. You stare at the jam. It reminds you of something. Revolution, perhaps. Vengeance. The smear of raspberry across cream like a battlefield where women win. He asks if you've considered seeing Dr. Pembroke again, the one who prescribed fainting and cold baths. You tell him you'd rather gargle with arsenic and join the circus. He chuckles as if you're joking. You are not. He folds the paper and finally looks at you. His eyes scan your face like he's searching for signs of sanity, and not the ghost of the woman in the wallpaper whispering siege plans behind your pupils. You seem tense, he says, biting into his scone. You imagine flipping the table, stealing his cravat, and using it to swing from the chandelier. You imagine kissing the maid on the mouth and announcing your departure via flaming curtain. Instead, you butter a slice of toast so violently it becomes performance art. Outside, the birds chirp like nothing is amiss. One of them might be spying for Edith. You aren't sure anymore. The lines between paranoia and insight have blurred, and the apothecary gave you something last week that makes reality flicker like a gas lamp in a storm. He coughs, slightly, and you glance up with hope, just a crumb. You chew slowly, eyes on him, wondering if the wallpaper woman would approve of poison or prefer something more symbolic, like locking him in the parlor with a piano and a metronome set to judgment. He finishes his tea and dabs at the corner of his mouth with a napkin, entirely unaware of the battle being waged 2 feet away. You could tell him, you could explain how your nerves are not delicate but coiled, sharp, aching for release. You could tell him the revolution smells like burnt sugar and laudanum, and it's already begun. Instead, you say, I'm going to take a walk. He nods. Fresh air will do you good. You stand, pick up your gloves, and walk past the chaise lounge. It stares at you with smug upholstery. You whisper, soon. Then you step outside, smile at the sky, and begin planning how to make lemon curd flammable. The tea party begins like all Victorian affairs, with passive aggression, lace doilies, and the unspoken understanding that at least one guest might be possessed. You've spent the morning arranging silverware, stuffing lemon cakes with frustration, and decapitating tulips that looked at you funny. The table is set with your finest china and an assortment of tea cakes that taste like apology. The air smells faintly of bergamot and doom. The first guest to arrive is Eleanor, who has not smiled since the Crimean War. She brings her own teaspoon and a stare that peels wallpaper. You admire her consistency. She sits without a word, adjusts her shawl with the precision of a woman who's survived both childbirth and 3 husbands, and sighs like she invented disappointment. Next is Florence, who talks only in metaphors and once tried to baptize a mirror. She curtsies to the biscuits and begins arranging sugar cubes into what might be a mausoleum. You do not interrupt. Art must be respected. Agnes arrives late, as is tradition, wearing a hat large enough to forecast weather. She kisses the air beside your cheek and hands you a pigeon, alive, in a bonnet. You take it without question because that's who you are now. The bird blinks at you like it knows your secrets. You place it gently in the fruit bowl and move on. Finally, Edith, always last, always composed, always radiating the kind of energy that suggests she has definitely cursed someone before breakfast. She places a single glove on the table, no explanation, no second glove, and pours herself tea with the calm of someone who's memorized everyone's will. Conversation begins politely. Eleanor comments on the scones. Florence compares them to the ache of a ghost remembering dance. Agnes hums a dirge and stares at the pigeon like it owes her money. Edith adds 3 spoons of sugar and asks if anyone else has been hearing whispers from their sewing kits. You nod. Of course you have. Everyone has. The tea is too strong, or not strong enough, or laced with something experimental from the apothecary's scarf pocket. It doesn't matter. Somewhere between the 3rd cup and the 2nd crying jag, Florence begins reciting Latin backwards. You don't stop her. She seems to be working through something. Eleanor dabs her eyes with a napkin shaped like a swan. Agnes eats a crumpet with her bare hands and mutters so many feathers under her breath. You remove your gloves slowly, deliberately, 1 finger at a time, like you're revealing a weapon or preparing to duel. The gesture feels important, sacred, like a silent sermon on liberation and sweaty wrists. The room hushes, even the pigeon stills. You place the gloves beside your untouched teacup, palms bare, knuckles defiant. Edith raises an eyebrow. Florence gasps. Eleanor nods solemnly. Agnes breaks into applause, then immediately denies it. You lean back in your chair and watch as the conversation veers off a cliff. Someone suggests summoning Queen Victoria's ghost to ask about vengeance etiquette. Someone else spills jam on the tablecloth and accuses the pigeon of treason. You fan yourself with the invitation card you never intended to send, and feel something inside you loosen like a button or a century of expectations. The wallpaper flickers. You think you see the woman again, watching. She winks. You wink back. By the time the tea has gone cold and the biscuits are soggy with unspoken trauma, everyone is laughing or sobbing. It's hard to tell. You offer more sugar, more lemon, more room in the fruit bowl for additional birds. The parlor feels softer now, like maybe it's forgiven you for the piano incident. Eventually, they leave. Eleanor with a tight-lipped nod, Florence quoting Hamlet at the drapes, Agnes clutching the pigeon like a diary, and Edith lingering just long enough to whisper, "Next time, bring the gloves." You close the door. The silence is not empty. It's full of cracked porcelain and possibility. You stare at your bare hands and think, this is how it starts. Then you light a candle, feed the pigeon a scone, and begin planning the next collapse. Your cousin Cordelia is draped across the chaise lounge like a discarded poem. Her hair is braided with tension and spite, her eyes bloodshot from either sorrow or soup-related triggers. No one is certain anymore. She begins weeping at precisely 2:17 p.m., prompted by the maid, asking whether she prefers chicken or leek. The answer, apparently, is neither, followed by 20 minutes of muffled sobbing and the phrase, "broth is betrayal." You try to comfort her. You pat her shoulder with the emotional commitment of a Victorian husband. She flinches like your hand is made of unpaid debts. You ask if she's eaten. She hisses. By 2:30, she's in your study, pacing in erratic loops and whispering to your bookshelf. You follow, holding a half-eaten scone like a peace offering, wondering when exactly Cordelia decided that furniture was emotionally unsafe. She pauses in front of the globe and spins it dramatically, eyes closed, as if hoping it will land on a better decade. It does not. She tells you she has a condition. You brace for tuberculosis, she says. Societal compression. You nod solemnly. This sounds right. Victorian life does press you into strange shapes, like corset fruit leather. You write it down on a napkin and declare yourself a doctor. She rewards your medical breakthrough by shrieking into the jam tray. Later, you find her curled beneath your writing desk with a shawl over her face and a spoon clutched like a weapon. She's muttering about gender roles and ornamental napkin rings. You crouch beside her and offer laudanum. She takes it with trembling fingers, drinks it like betrayal, and sighs so dramatically the wallpaper briefly wilts. You take a sip yourself. The bottle promises soothing relief for female misalignments, which you suspect includes everything from menstruation to reading too much. The taste is floral, with notes of despair. Everything softens. The floor tilts slightly. Cordelia begins humming a song that doesn't exist, and you realize you might also be unwell. Your aunt arrives unannounced, wearing a hat that suggests violence. She takes one look at Cordelia, tucks her umbrella under her arm, and declares, "This is what comes of thinking." You nod as if this is wisdom and not an emotional hostage note. Cordelia screams again. Your aunt leaves. At some point, Cordelia explains the trauma. You try to follow. Something about her debut ball, a broken shoe, a gentleman who sneezed during a waltz, and the way society expects women to exist silently, prettily, and without independent thought or appetite. You nod again, slower this time. You feel the laudanum bloom behind your eyes like an opium poppy with a grudge. You understand her completely. You take notes for your manifesto. Cordelia eats part of your curtain. You do not stop her. By evening, you are both lying on the drawing room rug, watching the chandelier sway like it's delivering coded messages. You've named it George. Cordelia wants to marry it. You toast with imaginary champagne and declare war on table manners. The maid peeks in, sees the two of you forming a spiral of limbs and lace, and backs out slowly. Wise woman. You whisper to Cordelia, "We're not crazy." She whispers back, "We're inconvenient." It feels like a prayer or an omen. You fall asleep with crumbs in your hair, revolution in your chest, and the firm belief that soup is, in fact, emotional terrorism. The sky is too blue, the kind of blue that makes you suspicious. You squint at it through lace gloves and suspicion. The sun shines like it's never known disappointment, which makes it deeply unrelatable. Still, you go. You gather your basket, your parasol, your existential dread, and follow the others to the hills for what's been enthusiastically, if not legally, dubbed a picnic. It was Edith's idea, which means it probably includes incantations and weaponry. The blankets are laid out like declarations of war. Tartan, obviously. No one trusts florals anymore after the wallpaper incident. Everyone's brought something. Florence has a flask of brandy and a face that says she's prepared to argue with God. Cordelia carries lemon tarts and a dagger with suspiciously recent polish. Agnes, barefoot and feral, is clutching what may be a taxidermied ferret. You bring fruit, knives, and a low, simmering contempt for the patriarchy. You sit cross-legged on a slope that smells like time and poor decisions. The wind lifts your hair with the delicate touch of a ghost ant, and the ground is just soft enough to whisper secrets back at you. There are strawberries, finger sandwiches, and a copy of Wuthering Heights with all the male dialogue scribbled out. Florence begins the meal by proposing a toast to the end of decorum and the rise of deeply personal vengeance. Everyone clinks teacups, then immediately switches to swigs from her flask. Edith pulls a velvet pouch from her bodice and tosses dried herbs into the breeze, murmuring in Latin. Cordelia passes around cucumber sandwiches and a list of men she intends to haunt preemptively. You reach for the watermelon, plump and innocent, and pull out your dessert knife. It glints in the sun, dramatic and unnecessary. You stab the fruit with all the restraint of a woman who's been told to smile one too many times. Juice sprays across your boots and onto Agnes's ferret. No one flinches. The act is understood, sacred. This is for feminism, you announce, sawing the melon into anarchic wedges. Someone murmurs, "And for pants." A general cheer follows. A bird overhead makes eye contact and flees. Edith fans herself with a hex. Cordelia is already rearranging apple slices into a sigil that makes the ground hum slightly. Florence tries to flirt with a tree. You pass around scones that taste like victory and heavy-handed metaphors. At one point, Agnes reads aloud from her diary. It is 14 pages of unpunctuated rage, written in charcoal and embroidered around the edges. Everyone applauds. Someone weeps. A bee lands on the jam and spontaneously combusts. Later, a group of men riding past on horseback slows to stare. You all turn, in sync, as if summoned by a single hive mind built of resentment and embroidery. The men do not linger. Florence blows them a kiss that doubles as a hex. The air smells faintly of ash and disappointment. As the sun dips behind the trees, you stretch out on the blanket, sticky with juice and conviction. Cordelia hums something haunting. Edith sketches something unspeakable in the dirt. Agnes teaches the ferret Latin. You close your eyes and let the warm, heady hush of the afternoon wrap around you like a padded cell lined in velvet and revolution. This is what sanity looks like now. Wild hair, grass stains, the soft crunch of a scone being eaten dramatically. The sky begins to pinken. You pack the knives with the teacups. The watermelon, now a desecrated husk, lies in the center of the blanket like a martyr. You nod at it with respect. Tomorrow, you will return to the parlor, the corset, the shallow breathing, and overcooked lamb. But today, you stabbed fruit for freedom and named clouds after your enemies. And for now, that will do. The table is round because it's more democratic, or so says Florence, who's wearing a veil and zero patience. Candles drip onto your grandmother's linen runner, the one you inherited under mysterious circumstances involving a will, 3 missing cousins, and a goat that wouldn't stop screaming. You have a plan, though. Tonight is for answers, also spirits, also maybe vengeance, depending on how cooperative the dead are feeling. You sit between Cordelia, who smells like cloves and defiance, and Edith, who brought her own crystal ball and insists on calling you child, despite being younger than you and twice as cursed. The lights are low, the air thick with lavender and unresolved tension. Someone has drawn protective symbols on the floor in jam. Probably Agnes. She believes in sugar-based summoning. You take hands. The circle hums with a mixture of power and poor impulse control. Florence begins the chant, her voice pitched somewhere between opera and mild threat. Candles flicker. The parlor curtains shiver. Someone's teacup cracks slightly, which feels like encouragement. Spirits, you intone. We seek your wisdom. There is a pause. Then the chandelier winks out, the fire flares blue, and Cordelia's eyes roll back in the universal language of brace yourself. A gust of wind whooshes through the room despite all windows being shut, locked, and draped in what you're 65% sure is actual mourning fabric. The table trembles. Florence bites her lip. Edith whispers, "Yes, that's the stuff." The spirit arrives with the energy of someone who's been left on hold for 70 years and just got through to customer service. She identifies herself as Miss Thistlethwaite, former governess, part-time medium, full-time grudge holder. Her voice comes from the corner, the table, and briefly the tea kettle. You are not alarmed. You've hosted worse. Miss Thistlethwaite is unimpressed with the living. She tells Florence to sit up straight, calls Edith a fraud, which Edith accepts with grace, and accuses Cordelia of hiding biscuits in her sleeve. Cordelia pretends to be offended but does not deny it. Then the ghost gets personal. She informs you that the silver cutlery, the real stuff, not the decorative nonsense you bring out for aunts and enemies, is hidden beneath the third stair from the top, under a loose board. You nod, eyes wide, making a note to immediately retrieve it once the spectral sass dies down. She continues, now focused on your husband. He, apparently, keeps a secret mustache comb in the false bottom of his shaving kit. You are not surprised, only irritated, that this confirms he puts more effort into his facial hair than into understanding your moods, literary opinions, or passionate speeches about the oppression of decorative corsetry. Everyone claps. Cordelia cries a little, possibly from joy or ghost proximity. Agnes attempts to high-five the spirit and ends up slapping the jam-covered floor. Miss Thistlethwaite lingers. She begins offering unsolicited advice on wallpaper, marital dynamics, and stew. You let her. She seems to need it. The room smells increasingly like regret and rosemary. Eventually, Florence asks if she's ready to return to the beyond. The ghost sighs, deeply and dramatically, and says she'll consider it once someone fixes the hinges on her old bedroom door, which still creaks on Thursdays and interrupts her haunting schedule. The candles flicker once more. The table stills. Cordelia belches demurely. The séance concludes with everyone slightly more disturbed and significantly more informed. Later that night, you pry up the stairboard. The silver gleams like victory. You hold up a fork and whisper, "Thank you, Miss Thistlethwaite." A faint breeze tugs your nightgown in response. You don't know if it's approval or warning, but you polish the cutlery anyway. You wake with dirt in your hair and purpose in your lungs. Outside, the sky is having a dramatic episode, and so are you. Breakfast is a lukewarm egg and someone else's opinion. You push it aside and mutter something about destiny. The maid nods and backs away slowly, as one does when someone looks ready to challenge God or ride a large animal into emotional clarity. The stables smell like hay and potential lawsuits. You march in like a woman who knows things specifically, how to yell at clouds and how to mount a horse without asking permission. Clementine, a dappled mare with judgmental eyes and the aura of a disillusioned governess, watches you approach with quiet approval. She's seen things. You feel kindred. You reject the saddle offered by the stable boy and insist on side saddle, because if you're going to have a crisis, you might as well do it historically. He begins to protest, then sees your expression equal parts laudanum and spiritual fury, and promptly faints into a wheelbarrow of oats. You do not check on him. You mount Clementine like you were born to sit sideways and cause concern. She snorts once, sharply, like a toast to your audacity, and then bolts. Wind tears at your skirts, dragging ribbons of lace and latent anger behind you. The field opens like a confession. You grip the reins with one hand and your last shred of decorum with the other. Birds scatter. Sheep judge you. You shout, "I am the wind," because sometimes the wind needs reminding. Your corset groans. Clementine thunders. You lose a shoe, possibly to a higher dimension. A poet hiding in the hedges drops his notebook in awe. His name is probably Sebastian, and he's been working on a sestina about teacups and mortality. Now he will write about you instead, and the margins will be stained with rosewater and longing. You do not slow down. Clementine is, fueled by something more potent than oats. Perhaps vengeance, perhaps feminism. You lean into her, and for a brief, golden moment, you are not a woman on a horse but a metaphor with excellent posture. Trees blur. A squirrel salutes. The wind screams your secrets back at you in French. Eventually, the hill runs out. You and Clementine skid to a halt at the edge of a dramatic cliff, because of course there's a dramatic cliff. Your bonnet flies off and is taken by destiny. You watch it vanish, then throw your glove after it for emphasis. Behind you, Edith is standing in a carriage, holding onto her hat and shouting something about decorum. Cordelia waves a handkerchief and yells, "Do a monologue." You consider it. Instead, you close your eyes and breathe. The corset digs in. Your thighs ache. Your lungs are full of freedom and pollen. Clementine turns her head and gently nudges your knee like a high five for the soul. The wind shifts. You whisper a promise to it, something about never returning to embroidery or opinions you didn't choose yourself, and it whispers back, something that sounds like, "Giddy up, madam." You laugh, wild and unladylike, and spur Clementine back down the hill like a prophecy with good balance. The poet faints. The sheep scatter again. Today, you are wind and thunder and lace trimmed with wrath. Tomorrow, you'll probably host a luncheon. But for now, the world belongs to you and the horse that gets it. It begins with a tart. Not metaphorically, an actual cherry tart, hurled through the air like a sugary declaration of war. It hits the wall beside Mr. Tittleton's head with the force of 10 years of swallowed sighs and undercooked apologies. He blinks once, twice, then excuses himself to fetch the broom, because he is a coward and has not yet read the room. Mrs. Tittleton does not wait for him to return. She lifts the rolling pin like it's a scepter and stands upon the baking table, scattering scones in every direction like holy relics. Her apron is askew, her hair looks like it just lost an argument with a lightning storm, and her eyes glow with the light of unmedicated clarity. Flour drifts through the air, sanctifying the moment. You watch from the doorway, holding a crumpet and your breath. She declares that she is done kneading dough and husbands, that henceforth she will only communicate via metaphor and interpretive bread sculpture. Then she picks up a baguette and uses it to point at the vicar's wife, who has inexplicably wandered in for a cinnamon bun and moral superiority. The vicar's wife turns to salt and scandal and flees. The rest of the village shows up within the hour, drawn by the scent of chaos and warm cinnamon. Mrs. Tittleton greets them by throwing a croissant like a discus and yelling, "Whence cometh your silence now, Margaret?" No one knows what Margaret did, but it must have been devastating because Margaret immediately bursts into tears and tries to atone with lemon curd. By sunset, Mrs. Tittleton has turned the bakery into a cathedral of emotional reclamation. A chalkboard out front reads, "Scones and screaming, 2 for 1. You order both." Inside, a child is weeping gently into a tea cake while their mother chants affirmations at a pie. Someone has crocheted a banner that says, "Let women be loud," and no one is quite sure how or when that happened. Mr. Tittleton returns around dusk, having spent the afternoon pretending to be busy with non-existent errands. He opens the door and is immediately hit with a scone to the chest. It's still warm. He looks down at it like it's the first honest communication he's received in years. Then he sits quietly in a chair and says nothing for 3 hours, which is progress. Later, Mrs. Tittleton climbs down from the table, wipes her hands on the remnants of a Victorian sponge, and looks around at the wreckage. The walls are frosted with buttercream and triumph. A small choir of widows is harmonizing, something that may or may not be Latin. You approach her, curtsy ironically, and suggest she run for mayor of emotional repression. She nods, once, solemnly, then tells you, only if the town hall has a fondant throne. You both agree this is reasonable. That night, you write her name in your journal under the heading, "Women Who Snapped and Made It Fashionable." You sleep better than you have in weeks. Outside, the moon shines down on a bakery turned battlefield turned sanctuary. Mrs. Tittleton is inside, humming softly, surrounded by pastries and power. The dreams arrive in Latin, dense and papal. You wake gasping with phrases like mulier furens and in vino veritas etched behind your eyes like divine graffiti. Breakfast is canceled because you called the toast a symbol of imperial decay and then bit the butter knife in half. The maid pretends not to notice. She's begun a quiet tally on the back of the pantry door labeled Thursday Madness. Your name is winning. The laudanum sings through your bloodstream like an opera with terrible intentions. You float instead of walk. Your slippers refuse to stay on your feet, as if they too are done being polite. By mid-morning, you've begun swearing in French, fluently and florally. Every time you stub your toe or remember your wedding night, you shout something that sounds like a pastry in crisis. A man on the street tips his hat and calls you continental. You curse his shoes in Morse code, and he limps for a week. The doctor arrives to check your humors and diagnose you with wilting. You hiss. He says something patronizing about bile and female fragility, and you respond in perfect, blasphemous Latin. He crosses himself. You feel powerful and slightly peckish. The neighbors send a polite card scrawled in shaky penmanship that reads, "Would you care to dine with us this evening? We admire your spirit." You circle the word spirit in red ink and send it back with a pressed moth and a single goose feather. They take this as a yes. You prepare as one must. The gown is purple and terrifying. Your hair is a series of statements. You accessorize with a brooch shaped like an omen and a vial of something unlabeled but judgmental. As you step out the door, a bird drops dead in your path. You thank it for its service. The dinner party is a lesson in forced laughter and boiled everything. The host greets you with trembling hands and offers you a seat next to a man who immediately apologizes for existing. He should. You say nothing and stare directly at his soul until he offers you his dessert fork. It's the only useful thing he's done all night. You eat very little, because the roast is suspicious and the peas look like they contain secrets. Instead, you drink the wine and let the drug speak through you like a prophet with terrible social skills. You ask the hostess if her wallpaper chose her, or if she simply surrendered. She laughs, then cries, then offers you more wine. By the third course, someone attempts small talk. You respond with an elaborate metaphor about rain clouds, gender roles, and the price of being perceived. The table goes quiet. The fire flickers in agreement. The maid drops a tureen and mutters, "Finally." The evening ends when you rise suddenly, declare, "This lamb is a metaphor for Victorian morality," and walk out wearing the curtains. No one stops you. Someone claps. The sky feels different. Back home, you collapse on the chaise like a defeated general. The cat watches from the windowsill with new respect. You whisper a phrase in Latin that translates to something like, "God is tired of being subtle." Then you sleep, still dressed like a warning. Alice doesn't announce her departure. She simply stops polishing the banister like it's her mortal enemy, sets down the teacup she's been holding since 1842, and walks out the front door with a look of thunderous peace. She doesn't even slam it. That's how you know it's serious. She leaves behind her apron, a half-eaten crumpet, and a note pinned to the inside of your wardrobe, written in violet ink and sheer nerve. Gone to marry Reginald. He smells like soot and possibility. There's a sword under your shawls. Use it only if bored or insulted, which is to say, use it often. You don't cry. You don't scream. You simply open the wardrobe, find the sword, and understand that love is real and sometimes leaves you steel-tipped gifts. The sword is impractical and dramatic, just like you. It gleams in the low afternoon light with the silent promise of poor decisions and improved posture. You name it Constance because it seems like the kind of name that wouldn't ask too many questions. Then you swing it at the bedpost for practice. The bedpost loses. You feel something close to joy for the first time since the vicar called your hat a cry for help. You take Constance everywhere, downstairs to breakfast, where your husband asks you what you're compensating for. You answer by buttering toast with the blade. He eats in silence. Upstairs to your writing desk, where you stab through a letter from your aunt simply because it began with, "Dearest, I'm concerned." You aren't. By lunch, you've installed yourself in the drawing room like a decorative threat. Guests arrive and leave again rapidly. One woman tries to engage you in conversation about doilies. You parry her suggestion with a well-timed flourish, and she departs with a newfound respect for boundaries. You consider joining Alice and Reginald on their chimney sweep honeymoon, but decide against it. True love deserves privacy, and no third wheels with swords. Instead, you write them a congratulatory note on stationery that smells faintly of sandalwood and vengeance. You include a pressed flower, a blessing, and a lock of your husband's hair, just in case. By tea, the house feels quieter, not empty, charged, like something is waiting. Wallpaper twitches. The piano refuses to be tuned. The ghost in the attic claps once and goes back to sleep. You host tea anyway, but the scones are shaped like skulls, and you insist everyone call you Lady of the Reckoning. Edith arrives with jam and a knowing smile. She doesn't ask questions. She never has. When night falls, you stand in the hallway with Constance and look out over the dimly lit stairs like a disgraced duchess in a tragic novel. You imagine Alice out there in the world, soot in her hair, joy in her lungs, wielding freedom like a fireplace poker. You salute her with the sword. The house creaks in approval. You go to bed armed and unbothered. You dream of chimney smoke and velvet revolutions. You do not miss the tea being served on time. You miss the possibility that someone in this house besides you ever understood the importance of a well-placed blade. You open the diary to a page that smells faintly of clove oil and vengeance. It's dated 3 weeks ago, though time has become a fluid, suspicious concept. The ink is your own, but the handwriting has developed a sharp tilt, like it's trying to lunge at someone. The page begins with a gentle list of daily activities. Took tea, cursed the wallpaper, reconsidered morality, and then rapidly devolves into diagrams of the drawing room, labeled with phrases like possible trapdoor, emotionally volatile ottoman, and do not trust the vase. You turn another page and find the words, his mustache must pay, underlined in increasingly frantic loops. It's written 12 times, possibly more, but the last few entries dissolve into something that looks like angry lace. You don't remember writing this, but you absolutely meant it. The phrase becomes a refrain, a war cry, a declaration of intent made during a laudanum-soaked thunderstorm, probably while wearing your second-best bonnet. You recall nothing specific, only the certainty that his mustache has offended both God and aesthetic principles. You wonder if it has legal counsel. Further into the diary, there's a list of grievances so long it requires an index. Item 34 simply reads, he exists too loudly. Item 57 is a charcoal sketch of his back turned toward you, labeled cowardice in wool. There are arrows, annotations, and a recipe for a very specific poison that requires nettles, a lock of hair, and a pigeon's bad mood. You pause, stare out the window, and consider the possibility that you have become both protagonist and unreliable narrator. The roses in the garden have started blooming in odd colors. One of them is black. It wasn't planted. You tell yourself it's fine. You've said that so many times, the walls have started saying it back. A faint scent of something scorched drifts through the parlor. Burnt roses, not freshly cut, charred, as if something was trying to send a floral message and got too ambitious. You follow the scent to the fireplace, where someone, possibly you, has burned a page torn from the Bible and a pamphlet titled, What to Do About Women. You smile at the ashes. They speak your language. The diary becomes less words and more spells, circles, Latin, doodles of serpents wearing cravats. One page is entirely devoted to the phrase, no more embroidery, written with such furious intensity the nib nearly tore the paper. Your handwriting becomes a weapon. Your words could be used in a courtroom or a duel. You wonder what the diary will look like when you're older, if you'll read it in a rocking chair surrounded by cats and scandal, or in an asylum with walls that whisper. Maybe you'll gift it to a niece as a warning. Maybe it will vanish in a puff of lavender smoke one day and reappear in a better century. Either way, it's no longer a diary. It's evidence of mischief, of fury, of genius disguised in corsets. You shut it and lock it in a drawer that no one is allowed to touch unless they're wearing gloves and a very specific expression of concern. The chandelier above you flickers. You do not check the window. You already know someone or something is watching. You pick up your pen, turn to a fresh page, and write one sentence. The revolution begins at tea. The sea does not invite you. It never has. It simply waits, flat and gray and patient, like a god who's seen worse. The morning fog rolls in heavy as gossip, softening the cliffs and swallowing the sound of reason. You put on your bonnet, the good one, the one that makes you look like you have secrets and no intention of forgiving anyone. Your shoes stay behind on the shore. They've witnessed enough. The first step into the water feels like betrayal. The second feels like baptism. By the third, you're laughing half hysteria, half liberation, as your petticoats balloon around you like an ambitious jellyfish. You walk deeper, past the point of decency, past the point of common sense, until the cold bites at your ribs and the wind howls through your bones like a choir of scandalized ants. You are not trying to die. You are trying to live in a century that refuses to let you. There's a difference. The waves slap at you in applause. Somewhere behind you, the horizon forgets your name. You taste salt, iron, and defiance. You tell the sea all your secrets, that you once considered poisoning your husband's ink bottle, that you prefer storms to silence, that sometimes you dream of a century where women aren't diagnosed for breathing too loud. The sea, in its infinite indifference, listens without judgment. You fall in love a little. A fish swims by, blinking twice like it understands the situation, but won't be getting involved. Its expression says, "You're doing great," but also, "Are you okay?" You nod solemnly and tell it that okay is a relative term. It flicks its tail and disappears into the green depths, probably to start a rumor about you among the oysters. When you reach waist deep, you stop. The fog wraps around you like a shawl made of secrets and salt. You raise your chin and say, "I'll have a drink," because the sea feels like the only bartender left who takes you seriously. The waves respond with a splash that hits you square in the mouth. You swallow it whole. It tastes like gin, punishment, and second chances. For a moment, everything is still. The world is suspended between inhale and exhale. You imagine yourself from above a small, furious figure in a frothing gown, conducting the Atlantic like an orchestra of misbehaving elements. You have never been freer. Then the wind shifts, and you remember your life on land, the parlor, the teacups, the endless expectation that you will apologize for being alive too vividly. You laugh again, sharp and wild, and the sound carries across the waves like a prophecy no one asked for but everyone will hear. Somewhere on the cliffs, a man walking his dog sees you and faints. You consider waving, then decide he doesn't deserve it. You wade a bit deeper instead, until your bonnet floats beside you like a loyal ghost. Eventually, the cold begins to whisper about mortality. You turn back, slowly, dragging half the ocean with you in folds of wet fabric and newfound conviction. Each step feels heavier, but also earned. When you reach the shore, you collapse into the sand, coughing up salt water and something that might be enlightenment. The sea hums behind you, satisfied. You lie there for a long time, staring at the gray sky, letting the wind rearrange your hair into something heroic. Your skin stings, your lungs ache, and you feel completely alive, uncontainably wrong, and absolutely right. You whisper to no one, "That'll do." The sea answers with another wave. The doctor arrives uninvited, as usual, smelling faintly of starch and misplaced confidence. His boots leave little trails of condescension across your rug. He sits without asking, opens his notebook, and announces that you've been overindulging in your tonics. You look him dead in the eye and take another sip directly from the bottle. It's not indulgence, it's research. He talks about fresh air and exercise, as though you haven't been running laps around sanity for months. He suggests you try knitting or prayer. You suggest he try exile. He laughs nervously, but you don't. You stare long enough for him to realize the air in the room has weight. The clock ticks like a countdown. He says this is all a rough patch, and you almost admire his optimism. A rough patch implies a road. What you're standing in feels more like a crater. You tell him this is not a phase, it's a reckoning, a renaissance, a violent bloom of awareness in a corseted world. He scribbles delusions of grandeur in his notebook. You lean over the table and correct his spelling. He adjusts his collar, clears his throat, and tries again. Perhaps, he says carefully, if you were to reduce the laudanum, your humors might rebalance. You ask which humor controls the desire to set his notebook on fire. He doesn't answer, which is wise, because you're already reaching for the matches. You decide to make your point visually. You fetch your latest chart, a pie chart, literally made of jam, detailing how much of your behavior is caused by laudanum, patriarchy, or sheer theatrical flair. The largest slice, raspberry, represents unapologetic chaos. You present it to him like scripture. He blinks at it, unsure whether to take notes or flee. You pick up a spoon and start explaining your methodology. By the time you reach the jam's margin of error, he's sweating. He tries to redirect, asking about your sleep. You tell him you sleep perfectly fine, usually after 2 teaspoons of medicine, a seance, and a brief correspondence with your better instincts. He writes, erratic, in the margin. You reach over and add visionary beside it. He recommends solitude. You point out you've been living in near-perfect solitude for years, spiritually, intellectually, and occasionally geographically. He opens his mouth to protest, but you cut him off with a small pirouette and a sharp gesture toward the door. This, you inform him, is me firing you. He blinks. Pardon? You repeat yourself through interpretive dance. It's mostly arm movements and subtle violence. He looks scandalized, which means it's working. You close the performance by brandishing your jam chart like a manifesto and declaring that his services are no longer required in your personal revolution. He stammers something about propriety. You tell him propriety is a scam invented by tired men with pocket watches. He collects his hat, his ego, and the little scraps of authority he has left, then scurries toward the door. Before he leaves, he tries one last attempt at professional concern. You'll want to keep taking small doses, he says weakly, for balance. You smile, sweet as poison. Doctor, the only thing unbalanced here is your understanding of miracles. When the door closes, you collapse back into your chair, exhausted but radiant. The room feels brighter, louder, yours. You lick a bit of jam from your thumb and declare the experiment successful. You never see him again, but sometimes, on particularly triumphant days, you imagine he still talks about you at medical dinners, whispering to colleagues about the woman who weaponized dessert and danced him out of his own profession. The parlor was never built for justice, but you've decided it will do. The fainting couch becomes the bench. The tea cart is repurposed into a witness stand. The chandelier, ornate, judgmental, serves as the all-seeing eye of God. Edith brings biscuits. Cordelia brings a gavel she carved from a rolling pin. The revolution, it turns out, smells faintly of bergamot and upholstery polish. You call the first session to order with a dramatic clearing of your throat and a sip of brandy disguised as tea. The women of the neighborhood arrive one by one, disguised as ladies but radiating conspiracy. There's Mrs. Tittleton, still dusted in flour and righteousness. Agnes, who carries a goat on a leash like a warning. And Florence, who has written an opening statement entirely in rhyme. The crimes are numerous. The punishments creative. The laughter unholy. The first accused is Mrs. Partridge, charged with insufficient tea stirring, which, according to the bylaws hastily written on the back of a scone wrapper, is both a moral and aesthetic failure. She protests that her wrists are weak. Cordelia demands evidence. Someone produces a teaspoon, trembling. You strike the gavel against a plate and declare her guilty of emotional laziness. Sentence: 1 week of embroidery, but only of unpleasant subjects, like economic inequality or her husband's personality. The next trial begins before the crumbs settle. Mr. Pembroke, who made the grave mistake of attending out of curiosity, stands accused of being smug about gardening. His defense is poor. He claims his roses simply respond to male authority. You bang the gavel so hard the jam trembles. Exile by goat, you pronounce. Agnes grins, tightens her grip on the leash, and the goat begins its slow, judgmental advance. Mr. Pembroke flees, leaving behind his hat and several ounces of misplaced dignity. You call for the next case, Lady Whitmore, for performing piety in mixed company. She faints strategically before sentencing, earning applause from the gallery. You sentence her to read Madame Bovary aloud until she understands it. Her eyes flutter open in horror. Justice is served. The air grows thick with delight and hysteria. Someone accuses the piano of harboring patriarchal undertones. Florence seconds the motion. You allow the charge to proceed. After a dramatic cross-examination involving minor key chords and one unfortunate sonata, the piano is declared guilty of moral superiority and sentenced to silence until further notice. You cover it with a shawl and whisper, "Think about what you've done." By mid-afternoon, the trials have grown more chaotic. Crimes now include wearing too much perfume of resignation, reading silently without sighing, and marrying for stability instead of drama. The sentences become performance art. One woman is ordered to dance out her despair. Another must compose a limerick about vengeance. A third is assigned to haunt her own dining room for a week, to develop character. You preside over it all like a benevolent tyrant, your gavel sticky with jam, your hair a halo of purpose. Every time the laughter grows too loud, you declare, "Order in the parlor," and the chandelier sways approvingly. Somewhere outside, men passing by slow their horses, hearing the roars of feminine justice spilling through the open windows, and continue on in silence, sensing it is wiser not to ask. As dusk settles, you close the final trial, the collective crime of existing too quietly for too long. The room falls silent. You stand, holding the gavel aloft, and deliver the verdict. "Guilty," you say softly, but forgiven conditionally, on the promise of future misconduct. The women cheer. Someone pours more brandy. The goat eats the evidence. You sink back into your chair, smiling faintly, as the parlor, once a place of polite conversation and emotional claustrophobia, glows with laughter, rebellion, and crumbs. For the first time, the room feels alive. Not proper, not respectable. Alive. You raise your teacup and declare the court adjourned. Justice, you think, tastes a lot like jam. You don't mean to become a myth. It happens gradually, like mildew or enlightenment. One day you're a woman with opinions and a fondness for unconventional behavior, and the next, you're the subject of whispered folklore. The butcher's wife claims you, once made eye contact with a weather vane and caused it to spin north for a week. The vicar's daughter insists you turned a sermon into a seance simply by sighing too loudly. You've stopped denying any of it. Denial is for people still pretending to be reasonable. When you walk through town, conversations tilt around you, like flowers chasing sunlight, and not the friendly kind of sunlight, but the kind that burns a little. You wear your bonnet low and your smile lower. The cobbler bows. The baker salutes you with a loaf. Even the lamplighter crosses himself as you pass, which is impressive considering you're fairly certain he's an atheist. You nod graciously and keep walking, your skirts whispering secrets against the cobblestones. Children trail behind you at a safe distance, mimicking your gait with exaggerated flourishes. One of them waves a stick like a scepter and shouts, "By the power of the bonnet." Another pretends to faint artistically onto the grass. You approve. It's important to teach the next generation proper dramatics. When one brave girl tugs on your sleeve and asks if you truly speak to ghosts, you crouch down, look her in the eye, and whisper, "Only on Thursdays." Her jaw drops. You offer her a biscuit and a wink before vanishing around the corner like a well-timed rumor. At the market, people hush as you approach. A fishmonger swears the sea grows calmer when you're near it. A seamstress claims her needles hum your name. You overhear two women arguing over whether you actually command pigeons. One insists she saw it herself. You, in the middle of a thunderstorm, arms outstretched, wind tearing through your skirts as pigeons circled like apostles. The other shakes her head and says that can't be true, because pigeons aren't that spiritual. You consider clarifying, but the truth is less fun than the legend. Instead, you buy a pair and leave exact change in the shape of a crescent moon. The myth expands in ways you cannot control. It grows teeth and lace, eats facts for breakfast, and wears your mannerisms like jewelry. You hear that someone painted your portrait without asking an oil masterpiece titled The Tempest's Mistress. Apparently, in it, you are taller, your hair brighter, your expression somewhere between divine revelation and mild disdain. You approve of the mild disdain. It's accurate. Men begin tipping their hats twice when they greet you, unsure if once is enough. Women curtsy out of habit, then stand a little taller, realizing they don't have to. A few even stop wearing corsets on days you pass through town. It feels like progress. One night, a stranger appears at your door, wide-eyed, soaked from rain, clutching a notebook. He claims he's a writer and begs to record your life's philosophy. You let him in, give him tea, and spend an hour explaining the importance of breakfast wine, moral anarchy, and never trusting men who say, "Actually." He leaves trembling, certain he's spoken with a prophet. You blow out the candles and laugh until the house shakes. By morning, someone has carved your initials into the bark of the oak by the green. A crow lands above it and caws 3 times like punctuation. You look up at the sky, half expecting thunder. It obliges. Later, as you stroll past the gossiping townsfolk, someone finally gathers the courage to ask, "Is it true what they say about the pigeons, the storms, the miracles?" You pause, tilt your head just enough to make them wonder if you're listening to something they can't hear. Then you smile, hand them a biscuit, and vanish into the mist before they can decide whether to be terrified or inspired. The bottle is almost empty, and the glass clinks like a closing chapter. You tilt it, watching the last syrupy drop slide down the neck like an executioner taking a bow. It lands on your tongue, bitter and sweet, the taste of endings pretending to be mercy. The label peels under your thumb, laudanum, for hysteria, nerves, and inconvenient clarity. You laugh softly. You've outgrown all 3. The world begins to slow, not in a graceful waltz, but like a machine realizing it's been tricked into running past its limits. The air feels heavier, too honest. You see everything at once, the dust in the light, the veins on your hands, the faint hum of a house that's tired of keeping your secrets. For a moment, you think you might sink into stillness. You don't. Stillness has never suited you. Your pulse thrums in your wrists like a drumbeat of rebellion. You pace the parlor, the floorboards creaking in rhythm. The corset feels looser, the air less cruel. The walls are still papered with flowers, but now they look like witnesses, not traps. You touch one and say, "We made it." The wallpaper does not answer. You don't need it to. The drug may be gone, but you are not emptied. You are distilled. Everything unnecessary has burned off, leaving only the essential you, the one that does not whisper apologies, the one that doesn't ask for permission to exist. The world was never built for that version, and you realize, perhaps it's better that way. Outside, the wind calls your name in a tone halfway between admiration and warning. You open the window and breathe it in. The sky is low, heavy with possibility, and you feel every particle of it against your skin. You should feel smaller, without your chemical courage, but instead you feel infinite, ungovernable, alive in a way that makes the horizon look nervous. Your husband knocks at the door, tentative as a man who's seen a prophecy in his own kitchen. He asks if you're feeling better. You tell him you are, and for the first time, it's not a lie. He nods, like a man who knows the danger of believing you. You pour him tea without poison, which is almost an act of grace. He drinks it like a man grateful for second chances he doesn't deserve. Later, you stand before the mirror. You're Reflection looks back, not softer, not kinder, but truer. There are faint shadows under your eyes and something fierce in their depths. You look less like a lady and more like an omen in lace. You like that. People start calling less. The doctor sends a note suggesting you rest more. You burn it in the fireplace and feed the ashes to your geraniums. The maid, the new one, who hasn't yet fled, watches in quiet awe. She tells you there are rumors in town that you've been cured, or cursed, or crowned. You smile and tell her they're all correct. You take long walks alone now. The air tastes like salt and scandal. The trees bow when you pass. You carry no bottle, no fan, no fear. Sometimes you stop by the cliffs, where the sea roars its endless sermon, and you nod along like an equal. Once, a man passing by calls you dangerous. You thank him. It's the first true compliment you've received in years. At night, you sleep without the tonic. Your dreams are vivid, lawless, and yours alone. When morning comes, you rise before the sun, light the fire, and pour yourself tea strong enough to resurrect the dead. The world outside still spins too slow, but you've learned to walk faster. You are not cured. You are awake, and that is far worse for them. Years from now, they will write about you in polite italics. You will become an anecdote in a textbook, a curious paragraph between the Industrial Revolution and the invention of common sense. They will say you were unwell, that you and the other women of your kind were victims of hysteria, that the drug made you see things that weren't there. They will not mention that the things you saw were truer than anything in their clean, sober world. They will call it madness, because madness is easier to name than awakening. They'll talk about the laudanum in hushed fascination, as though it were a ghost story, a tincture of opium and honeyed deceit. They'll describe it with nostalgia, as if it were simply perfume and poor judgment. They'll never mention the taste metallic and holy, or the way it loosened the tongue of your mind until the truth spilled out like confession. They'll call it a medical misstep, but you'll remember it as a door, one you kicked open barefoot. Some scholar with too many candles and not enough imagination will write a paper titled The Feminine Delirium, a study in emotional excess. He will footnote you incorrectly, misquote your diary, and call you anonymous subject number 14. He will never understand that your so-called excess was simply humanity in its proper dosage. They will diagnose passion as illness, rebellion as imbalance, clarity as collapse. They always do. You will not be there to correct them. But history has a way of remembering the wrong things loudly and the right things quietly. Somewhere, in a library filled with the sighs of dust, a young woman will read your name and pause. She will trace the sentence that calls you fragile and feel, in her bones, that it's a lie. She will laugh softly, the way you once did when someone called you delicate, and she will whisper, "No, she was alive." That will be enough. They will say you were touched by hysteria, but you know better. You were touched by knowledge, the kind that burns through corsets and prayers, the kind that leaves lace smoldering. You remember the taste of clarity, sharp and sweet, cutting through the fog like a blade through silk. You remember what it felt like to look at the world and see it blink first. There will be paintings of you, of course. They'll exaggerate your pallor, your fainting, your wild eyes. No one paints sanity. It doesn't sell. They'll hang you on museum walls as a warning or a curiosity, surrounded by placards written by men who think tragedy is romantic. But in the brushstrokes, beneath the pearl buttons and the corseted sighs, there will be something they can't explain, something alive, coiled, and laughing. They will call it hysteria's glow. You will know it was freedom. The tuba, oddly enough, will make an appearance in the retellings. Someone will mention that you once fought one in the conservatory, and scholars will debate what it symbolizes. Male dominance, they'll say, the repression of sound, a metaphor for domestic discord. They will not understand that it was simply loud and wrong, and you were simply right. In their accounts, They will bury the madness in poetry and science, but the truth will hum between the lines like an unbroken string. It was never hysteria. It was never sickness. It was the body remembering it was more than a vessel for someone else's expectations. It was the soul unbuttoning its collar. It was laughter in the face of prescription. Years pass, then decades, then centuries. The bottle of laudanum becomes an artifact, sealed behind glass, a relic of a regrettable era. They will stand before it, staring at the label that once trembled in your hand, and feel something they cannot name, a strange mix of dread and envy, the whisper of rebellion in a jar. They'll call you a footnote, but you were the footprint, the mark pressed into time, proof that something wild once walked there. And if they listen closely, between the pages and the polite revisions, they might still hear you laughing, loudly, possibly at the tuba.